The millionaire faints at the sight of the beggar's scar. The bustling streets of New York City pulsed with energy as Jonathan Reed walked with purpose down Fifth Avenue. At 38, he was the epitome of success. His company, Reed Technologies, having revolutionized the artificial intelligence industry across North America. With his tailored suit and piercing gaze, Jonathan exuded confidence and power. On this crisp October day, the sky was a brilliant blue, typical of autumn in the Big Apple. Jonathan had decided to take a stroll through Central Park before his next meeting. He enjoyed occasionally mingling with everyday people, remembering his humble beginnings and staying connected to a reality that many of his millionaire colleagues seemed to forget. As he walked along the edge of the park, something caught his attention. On a bench, hunched over with a small cup in front of her, sat an elderly woman. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her tangled hair falling over her wrinkled face. But it wasn't her appearance that made Jonathan stop in his tracks. It was a mark. A birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon, just below the woman's right eye. A mark identical to the one his mother, Grace Reed, had borne all her life. A mark Jonathan hadn't seen in 5 long, painful years. Jonathan's heart began to race. His hands trembled as he slowly approached the woman. Could it be possible? After so much time, so many fruitless searches, so many sleepless nights, wondering what had happened. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jonathan said, his voice shaking. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The woman looked up, her brown eyes clouded with confusion and weariness. Jonathan held his breath. Those eyes, they were the same eyes that had looked at him with love throughout his childhood. "Mom?" he whispered, unable to contain the emotion in his voice. "Is it you?" The woman blinked several times, her face a mask of perplexity. "Mom," she repeated hoarsely. "I'm sorry, young man. I think you're confusing me with someone else." Jonathan felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. It was her, he was sure. The birthmark, the eyes, even the way she tilted her head slightly when she was confused. Everything screamed that this woman was Grace Reed, his missing mother. But she didn't recognize him. "Please," Jonathan insisted, kneeling beside her. "Look at me closely. It's me, Jonathan, your son." The woman stared at him intently, her eyes scanning Jonathan's face as if searching for something familiar. For a moment, Jonathan thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by an apologetic expression. "I'm very sorry," she said softly. "But I don't know you. It must be a mistake." Jonathan remained there, paralyzed by disbelief and pain. How was it possible that his own mother didn't recognize him? What had happened in these 5 years to erase every memory of her son? As people passed around them, some casting curious glances at the strange scene of the well-dressed man kneeling in front of a homeless woman, Jonathan made a decision. He wasn't going to lose his mother again, no matter what it cost. "Ma'am," he said with determination, "I know this will sound strange, but I need you to trust me. I want to help you. Would you allow me to take you to a hospital for a checkup?" The woman looked at him with distrust. Why would you do that for a stranger? Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat. "Because I believe you're my mother, and I've been looking for you for 5 years. Please let me help you." Something in the sincerity of his voice seemed to move the woman. After a long moment of doubt, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll go with you." Carefully, Jonathan helped the woman to her feet. As they walked towards his car parked nearby, he couldn't help but notice how fragile she felt, how much she had changed in these years. What had happened to her? Why couldn't she remember him? As they drove away from Central Park, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was going to change his life forever. What he didn't know was how deep and complex the mystery he was about to unravel would be, nor the dark secrets that lurked in his family's past. Fate had set in motion a series of events that would shake the foundations of everything Jonathan believed he knew about himself and his family. New York Presbyterian Hospital loomed imposingly against the evening sky as Jonathan parked his luxury car in the emergency area. Throughout the journey, he had cast furtive glances at the woman seated in the passenger seat, desperately searching for any sign of recognition in her eyes, but she remained silent, her gaze lost in the city streets, rapidly passing by the window. "We've arrived," Jonathan announced softly, turning off the engine. "Are you ready to go in?" The woman nodded slowly, her face a mixture of confusion and resignation. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she murmured. "But thank you." Those words were like a dagger to Jonathan's heart. How could he explain that every fiber of his being screamed that this woman was his mother? How could he make her understand the anguish of the last 5 years, the sleepless nights, the fruitless searches? Gently, he helped the woman out of the car and guided her to the entrance. At the reception, Jonathan used all the influence his name and fortune granted him to ensure immediate attention. "I need you to run every possible test," he told the head nurse, his voice laden with urgency. "Blood work, MRI, everything, and I need the results as soon as possible." The nurse, impressed by Jonathan's intensity and recognizing the name of the famous entrepreneur, nodded seriously. "Of course, Mr. Reed. We'll take care of everything immediately." The following hours were a whirlwind of medical tests, consultations with specialists, and growing anxiety that threatened to consume Jonathan. As he waited outside the MRI room, his mind couldn't stop racing. What if he was wrong? What if this woman wasn't really his mother? But every time doubt threatened to overtake him, the image of that familiar birthmark came back to his mind, reaffirming his conviction. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Alexandra Morales, a renowned neurologist, approached Jonathan with a grave expression on her face. "Mr. Reed," the doctor began, her voice laden with seriousness, "we've completed all the exams and have the preliminary results. Could we speak in private?" Jonathan felt his heart racing. "Of course, doctor. Is she my mother?" "Doctor." Morales guided him to a small office and closed the door behind them. "Mr. Reed, based on the rapid DNA tests we performed, I can confirm that this woman is indeed your biological mother." Jonathan felt his legs giving way. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his mind spinning with a mixture of relief, joy, and confusion. "But why doesn't she recognize me? What's happened to her?" The neurologist took a seat across from him, her expression becoming even more serious. "I'm afraid I have difficult news, Mr. Reed. The brain scans show clear signs of early-onset Alzheimer's. It's a particularly aggressive form of the disease that can manifest in much younger people than usual." Jonathan felt as if the floor was opening up beneath his feet. "Alzheimer's? But she's only 62 years old." "Unfortunately, in cases of early-onset Alzheimer's, age is not a determining factor," Dr. Morales explained. "Symptoms can begin even in one's 40s or 50s. In your mother's case, it seems the disease has progressed significantly in recent years." "Does this explain her disappearance?" Jonathan asked, trying to process the avalanche of information. The doctor nodded gravely. "It's very likely. In the initial stages of the disease, it's not unusual for patients to experience episodes of confusion and disorientation. She could have left home one day and, due to the progression of the disease, forgotten who she was and where she lived." Jonathan covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. His mother, the strong and vivacious woman who had raised him, had been wandering the streets for 5 years, lost in the labyrinths of her own mind. Is there any cure?" he asked, although deep down he feared the answer. Dr. Morales shook her head. "I'm sorry to say that, at this moment, there is no cure for Alzheimer's. There are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and slow the progression of the disease, but—" "I'll do whatever is necessary," Jonathan interrupted, his voice laden with determination. "Any treatment, any specialist, no matter the cost. I want her to receive the best possible care." The neurologist nodded understandingly. "I understand, Mr. Reed. I'll prepare a comprehensive treatment plan and recommend the best specialists in the field, but I must warn you that the road ahead won't be easy." Jonathan stood up, his face a mask of resolution. "I don't care how difficult it is, doctor. She's my mother. I'll do everything in my power to help her." As he left the office to reunite with his mother, Jonathan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. Joy at having found her, pain for her condition, guilt for not having found her sooner, but above all an unshakable determination to do everything possible to help her. What Jonathan didn't know was that his mother's diagnosis was only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lurked family secrets and hidden truths that would soon come to light, threatening to shake the foundations of everything he believed he knew about his past and that of his family. Sunlight filtered timidly through the curtains of the luxurious suite at Mount Sinai Hospital, where Jonathan had decided to transfer his mother to provide her with the best possible care. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful encounter on the street, and each day was an emotional roller coaster for Jonathan. Grace, as he now knew the woman who was once a successful businesswoman and devoted mother was called, spent most of her time immersed in a state of confusion. There were moments, brief flashes of clarity, when she seemed to recognize Jonathan, but those instances were fleeting, disappearing as quickly as they came. That morning, as Jonathan entered the room with a bouquet of lilies, his mother's favorite flowers, he encountered a scene that broke his heart. Grace was sitting by the window, her gaze lost in the New York City skyline, mumbling incomprehensible words. "Good morning, Mum," he said softly, approaching her. "I brought your favorite flowers." Grace turned slowly, her eyes focusing on Jonathan with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "Jonathan?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Is that you, my boy?" Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. It was one of those rare moments of lucidity. "Yes, Mom," he replied, fighting against the lump in his throat. "It's me." "Oh, my little one," said Grace, extending a trembling hand towards him. "You've grown so much. Where are we?" Jonathan knelt beside his mother's chair, taking her hand in his. "We're in the hospital, Mum. You've been sick, but we're taking care of you. Everything's going to be all right." Grace frowned as if trying to remember something important. "The hospital? Yes, I remember something. Jonathan, there's something I need to tell you. It's about your father." Jonathan tensed. His father, Robert Reed, had died when he was barely 15 years old, or at least that's what he had always been told. "What about Dad, Mom? He's not—" Grace struggled to form the words, her mind clouding over again. "It's not what you think. There are secrets, my boy, secrets I've kept for so long." "What secrets, Mom?" asked Jonathan, leaning in closer. "Please tell me." But it was too late. The lucidity vanished from Grace's eyes as quickly as it had come. Her gaze became lost again, and she began to hum an old lullaby. Jonathan remained there, his mind spinning. What secrets could his mother have kept all these years? And what did they have to do with his father? Determined to uncover the truth, Jonathan left the hospital room with renewed purpose. It was time to unearth the past, no matter how painful it might be. His first stop was the old family home in the Upper East Side. No one had lived there for years, but Jonathan had maintained the property, unable to part with the memories it contained. As he entered, the smell of dust and abandonment hit him like a wave. He walked through the rooms, each one filled with memories of a life that now seemed so distant. In his mother's study, he began to search through drawers and cabinets, looking for any clue that might shed light on the mentioned secrets. After hours of fruitless searching, when he was about to give up, Jonathan noticed something strange at the bottom of an old wardrobe, a panel that seemed slightly out of place. With his heart racing, he pressed the panel, revealing a small secret compartment. Inside, he found a rusty metal box. With trembling hands, he opened it, revealing its contents: old photographs, yellowed letters, and a worn diary. Jonathan picked up one of the photos. It showed his mother, much younger, embracing a man who wasn't his father. On the back of the photo, in his mother's handwriting, was written, "Stephen and me, Boston, 1985. "Who the hell is Stephen?" Jonathan muttered, feeling the ground move beneath his feet. He opened the diary and began to read the first entry. March 20th, 1985. "Today I met Stephen Morgan. He's the new partner in the company, and there's something about him that intrigues me. Robert was busy with the investors, so Stephen and I spent the evening talking. I've never felt this way with anyone. God forgive me, but I think I'm falling in love." Jonathan dropped the diary, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Had his mother had an affair? And what did this mean for him? With shaking hands, he picked up one of the letters. The handwriting was different, masculine and elegant. "My dearest Grace, I can't stop thinking about you. I know what we have is impossible, that you have a family, but the heart doesn't understand reason. Little Jonathan is the spitting image of you, and every time I see him, I can't help but wonder. Always yours, Stephen." Jonathan felt like he couldn't breathe. The implications of that letter were too big to process. Could it be that the man he had always called father wasn't really his biological father? Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, Jonathan carefully packed all the documents in his briefcase. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to look for them. His next destination, Boston, the city where everything seemed to have begun. As he drove down the highway with the sun setting on the horizon, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about how these revelations would change his life. Who was he really? And what other secrets did his family hold? What he didn't know was that his journey to Boston would unleash a series of events that would not only reveal the truth about his past, but also put everything he had built at risk. Boston rose before Jonathan like a tapestry of history and modernity, its skyline a testament to centuries of American progress. The crisp morning air carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm bagels as the sun began to peek over the Charles River. Jonathan had arrived the night before, checking into a boutique hotel in Back Bay. Now, with the first light of day, he was ready to begin his investigation. His first stop was the City Hall's records office. If Stephen Morgan had lived in Boston in 1985, there should be some record of his presence. The records office was housed in a restored colonial building with heavy wooden doors and wrought iron window grills. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and history. "Good morning," Jonathan greeted the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with thick-rimmed glasses. "I'm looking for information about a person who lived here in 1985. His name is Stephen Morgan." The woman looked at him curiously. "Records from that time aren't digitized, sir. I'll have to search manually. It might take some time." "That's not a problem," Jonathan replied, pulling out his wallet. "I'd be happy to compensate for any inconvenience." After a generous donation to expedite the process, Jonathan found himself in a small waiting room surrounded by shelves full of ancient books and dusty folders. As he waited, he couldn't help but think about his mother, alone in that hospital room in New York. What would she say if she knew what he was doing? Would she approve of his search for the truth, or prefer that the secrets remain buried? After what seemed like an eternity, the receptionist returned with a yellowed folder in her hands. "I found something, sir," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Stephen Morgan lived here from 1984 to 1986. He worked as a manager at the Boston Harbor Development Project." Jonathan felt his heart race. It was real. Stephen Morgan wasn't just a name in an old photograph or a signature on a love letter. He was a real person, with a life in Boston. "Do you have any address?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. The woman consulted her notes. "Yes, he lived in a house in Beacon Hill, but that was almost 40 years ago, sir. It's unlikely he still lives there." Jonathan nodded, thanking the woman and leaving the building with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most historic and picturesque neighborhoods. It seemed fitting that his mother's possible lover had lived there. As he walked through the cobblestone streets of the city, Jonathan couldn't help but notice the irony. He had come to Boston seeking answers about his past, but each discovery only seemed to generate more questions. Upon reaching Beacon Hill, Jonathan paused, observing the rows of beautiful brick townhouses with their characteristic bow windows. Had his mother and Stephen shared stolen moments in one of these houses? Determined to follow every lead, Jonathan began asking the older neighbors of the area. After several fruitless conversations, he finally found Mrs. Sullivan, an elderly woman who had lived there all her life. "Stephen Morgan," said the woman, her wrinkled eyes gleaming with recognition. "So of course I remember him. A very handsome and educated man. He lived in the house on the corner, the one with the blue door." "Do you know what became of him?" Jonathan asked, holding his breath. Mrs. Sullivan frowned, as if trying to remember. "He left suddenly at the end of '86. There were rumors. They said he had problems with the harbor project. Something about missing money, but the truth was never known." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. Problems with the project. Missing money. Stephen Morgan's story seemed to be more complicated than he had imagined. He thanked Mrs. Sullivan and headed to the house with the blue door. It was abandoned, with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. But something caught his attention. On the doorframe, almost invisible under years of grime, there was a mark, a symbol that Jonathan recognized instantly. It was the same symbol he had seen tattooed on his father's, Robert Reed's, wrist when he was a child. Suddenly, a voice behind him startled him. "You shouldn't be snooping around other people's houses, young man." Jonathan turned quickly, coming face to face with an older man with a rugged appearance and a penetrating gaze. "I'm looking for information about Stephen Morgan," Jonathan said, deciding to be direct. "Did you know him?" The man stared at him for a long moment, as if evaluating him. Finally he spoke. "Stephen Morgan is dead, and if you know what's good for you, you'll stop asking questions about him." Before Jonathan could react, the man turned on his heel and disappeared among the narrow streets of Beacon Hill, leaving him with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that he was getting into something much bigger and more dangerous than he had imagined. The afternoon sun bathed Boston Common in golden light, as Jonathan, still shaken by the encounter with the mysterious man, decided to seek refuge in a small cafe on the edge of the park. As he sipped a strong black coffee, his mind raced, trying to connect the pieces of the puzzle his life had become. Stephen Morgan was dead. The symbol on the door was the same as his father's tattoo, and now a stranger was warning him about asking more questions. Each revelation seemed to open the door to more mysteries. Determined not to be intimidated, Jonathan took out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered, "Hello? Uncle Jack, it's Jonathan. I need your help." Jack Winters, his mother's younger brother and former detective with the NYPD, was known for his ability to unearth information. If anyone could help him get to the bottom of this mystery, it was him. "Jonathan? Kid, it's been years. What's going on?" Jonathan took a deep breath and began to relate everything that had happened, from the encounter with his mother on the streets to the discoveries in Boston. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I knew this day would come," Jack finally said, his voice heavy with regret. "Jonathan, there are things about your family, about your father, that you were never told. Dangerous things." "I need to know the truth, Uncle Jack," Jonathan insisted. "Please," Jack sighed heavily. "All right, but not over the phone. I'm coming there. Meet me at the top of the Prudential Tower at nightfall. And, Jonathan, be careful. Don't trust anyone." The call ended, leaving Jonathan with a mix of anticipation and fear. The hours until nightfall seemed to drag on, each minute laden with tension. When he finally reached the observation deck of the Prudential Tower, with its impressive panoramic view of Boston, Jonathan found his Uncle Jack waiting for him. The years hadn't been kind to him. His once jet-black hair was now peppered with grey, and deep wrinkles furrowed his face. "You've grown, kid," Jack said briefly, embracing Jonathan. "You look so much like your mother." "Uncle, please," Jonathan urged. "I need to know the truth." Jack nodded gravely, guiding Jonathan towards a secluded corner away from the few tourists left on the observation deck. "Your father, Robert, wasn't the man you thought you knew," Jack began, his voice barely a whisper. "He was part of an organization, a group that operated in the shadows, pulling strings in the world of business and politics. The symbol you saw, the one he had tattooed, was the mark of this organization." Jonathan felt like he couldn't breathe. What kind of organization? They called themselves the Guardians. They claimed to protect America's interests, but in reality... Jack paused, looking around cautiously. In reality, they manipulated everything, from government contracts to elections. Your father was one of the high-ranking members. But what about Mom? And Stephen Morgan? Jack sighed deeply. Your mother didn't know anything at first. She met Stephen at a company party. He was new in town, charismatic, different from Robert. They fell in love. Jonathan felt his world crumbling. "So, Stephen, is he my real father?" "I don't know for certain," Jack admitted. "But what I do know is that when Robert found out about the affair, things got ugly. Stephen disappeared suddenly. Officially, he died in an accident at the Harbor Project, but it wasn't an accident," Jonathan completed, feeling a chill run down his spine. Jack nodded somberly. "Your mother was devastated. She threatened to leave Robert, to tell everything she knew. That's when the Guardians intervened." "What did they do?" "They silenced her," Jack said, his voice breaking. "Not physically, but they used their connections. Suddenly, your mother started having memory problems, acting erratically. Doctors diagnosed early-onset Alzheimer's, but I always suspected there was more to it." Jonathan stood up, unable to contain his agitation. "Are you saying they did something to my mother? That her illness isn't natural?" "I can't prove it," Jack admitted, But I know my sister. Her deterioration was too fast, too convenient for the Guardians. And my father. What happened to him? Officially, he died in a car accident when you were 15. But the truth... Jack paused as if hesitating to continue. What, Uncle? Tell me. The truth is that Robert wanted out. He regretted what they had done to your mother, everything. He threatened to expose the Guardians. And they took care of him. Jonathan collapsed back onto the bench, overwhelmed by the revelations. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about his family, was a lie. Why are you telling me this now? He finally asked. Because you're in danger, Jonathan, Jack said, his voice laden with urgency. By starting to ask questions, you've caught their attention. The Guardians are still out there in the shadows, and they don't like old secrets being stirred up. What should I do? You have two options, Jack said. You can forget all this, go back to your life and pretend you never knew the truth. Or what? Or you can fight. Expose the truth, bring down the Guardians. But if you choose that path, you need to know it will be dangerous. Very dangerous. Jonathan stood up, his face a mask of determination. I can't ignore this, Uncle. I owe the truth to my mother, to Stephen, even to my father. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. Jack nodded, a mixture of pride and concern on his face. Then listen carefully. There's someone else who can help you, someone who knew Stephen and has been investigating the Guardians for years. Her name is Isabel Foster. She lives in Washington, D.C. How do I find her? She'll find you, Jack said, standing up. Go to D.C., stay at the Hay Adams Hotel. She'll contact you. As the sun set over Boston, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Jonathan said goodbye to his uncle, his mind spinning with all the information he had received. He knew he was about to embark on the most dangerous journey of his life, one that could cost him everything. But he also knew he had no other choice. The truth was waiting, and he was determined to find it. Washington, D.C., with its neoclassical monuments and wide avenues, seemed like a city built on secrets. But for Jonathan, who had been staying at the Hay Adams Hotel for 3 days, the capital had become a maze of anxiety and expectation. Every sound, every shadow made him jump. Was it Isabel Foster finally approaching, or were the Guardians closing in on him? It was on the afternoon of the 4th day, while he was having coffee on the hotel's rooftop terrace with its view of the White House, when it finally happened. The past always catches up with us, doesn't it, Mr. Reed? Jonathan turned abruptly. Beside him, as if she had appeared out of thin air, sat a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and eyes that sparkled with sharp intelligence. Isabel Foster? Jonathan asked, his heart pounding. The woman nodded slightly. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, young man. The Guardians are restless, but perhaps it's time they came to light. Over the next few hours, in the privacy of Jonathan's room, Isabel unraveled a story that seemed straight out of a spy novel. The Guardians, she explained, had emerged in the 1970s, a group of businessmen and politicians who believed that America needed a firm hand to guide it. At first, their intentions might have seemed noble, Isabel said. They wanted stability, progress. But power corrupts, and soon they became what they swore to combat. And Stephen, how does he fit into all this? Jonathan asked. Isabel smiled sadly. Stephen was my brother. He was an idealist, a brilliant engineer. The Guardians recruited him to work on the Boston Harbor project, but when he discovered the truth about them, about how they used the project to launder money and finance their operations, he decided to expose them. And that's why they killed him, Jonathan concluded. Yes, but not before Stephen could secure evidence, Isabel said, her eyes gleaming. Documents, recordings, everything needed to bring down the Guardians. He hid it all before his death. Jonathan leaned forward, his heart pounding. Where is this evidence, Guy? That's the question, isn't it? Isabel smiled. Stephen was brilliant, but also paranoid. He created an elaborate system of clues and riddles to protect the location of the evidence. And the key to it all is with your mother, My mother? But she doesn't remember anything. Are you sure? Isabel asked, raising an eyebrow. Alzheimer's is a cruel disease, but also mysterious. There are moments of clarity, memories that resurface from the depths. And your mother, Jonathan, she was special to Stephen. If he trusted anyone with the final key, it was her. Jonathan stood up, his mind racing. I have to go back to New York. I have to talk to my mother. Not so fast, young man, Isabel warned. The Guardians are watching you. The moment you approach your mother, they'll know. We need a plan. Over the next few hours, Jonathan and Isabel devised a strategy. They would use Jonathan's resources, his influence in the business world, to create a distraction. While the Guardians were busy with a supposed corporate merger that would threaten their interests, Jonathan would have a window to reach his mother. 3 days later, Jonathan was back at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. His heart was pounding as he approached his mother's room. What would he find? Would he be able to reach her, to awaken the memories buried in the depths of her mind? As he entered, he found Grace sitting by the window, as always, but there was something different in her gaze, a spark he hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he said softly, approaching. "It's me, Jonathan." Grace turned slowly, her eyes meeting her son's, and then the miracle happened. "Jonathan," she said, her voice clear and firm, "my boy, you've come back." Tears sprang from Jonathan's eyes as he knelt beside his mother, taking her hands in his. "Yes, Mom. I'm here, and I need your help." Over the next hour, in a moment of lucidity that seemed like a gift from heaven, Grace spoke. She talked about Stephen, about their forbidden love, about secrets and lies. And finally, she gave Jonathan the key he had been looking for. "In the Boston house," Grace whispered, "behind the mirror in the master bedroom. Stephen left something there, something important. He said it was the key to righting all the wrongs." Jonathan kissed his mother's forehead, his heart full of gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Mum. I'm going to fix all of this. I promise you." As he left the hospital, Jonathan knew he was heading towards the final battle. With the information from his mother and Isabel's help, he had a chance to expose the Guardians, to avenge Stephen and his father, to finally uncover the whole truth. But he also knew that the danger had never been greater. The Guardians wouldn't surrender without a fight, and Jonathan was about to unleash a storm that could change everything. As he drove back to Boston, with the sun setting on the horizon, Jonathan allowed himself a moment of reflection. His life had changed irrevocably since that day he found his mother on the streets of New York. He had uncovered secrets, unraveled lies, and embarked on a mission that went far beyond himself. He was no longer just Jonathan Reed, the successful entrepreneur. Now he was the bearer of a truth that could shake the foundations of America, and he was determined to see this mission through to the end, no matter the cost. As the lights of Boston appeared in the distance, Jonathan knew he was heading towards the final chapter of this saga. The truth was within his reach, and nothing and no one would stop him now.